Hey friends, thank you so much. This is Karen Snyder, the Line Mortgage, and you are joining us for our first ever webinar. This time today we are going to be talking to one of my most favorite people, Diane Edwards, and she is not only Chief Officer at Align Mortgage, but she's credit officer, but she's also an amazing underwriter with a lot of years of experience. Now, remember, this is a live event. You are welcome to send in to me in the comments any questions that you may have, and we will have these answered today while we are live. Otherwise, I've already received questions from many agents already, and we have prepared those answers. And with that, I would like to introduce one of my most favorite people in the world, Diane Edwards.
Good morning. I am also a big fan of Karen Snyder's. We have worked together, I'm going to say about 12 years through the ups and downs of several companies, but I adore her. I can remember the very first thing. She's a giver, if you guys don't know that, and she wanted to gift me something that would remind me of that branch and herself. And she sent me the cutest brown bear with the big sergeant hat on to remind me that her Fort Leonard Wood is where we raise the drill sergeants, if you will. So she and I go back a long way. I respect her thoroughly. A little bit about me. I am a mom of three, a grandma of three, all boys. God's got a funny sense of humor. So I'm definitely a boy mom, Nana. I've been in the business since 1980. Love mortgage lending, devoted my life to it outside of my family. So I'm really looking forward to what we're doing today because I think it's really important in the environment that we're in that we communicate effectively to know what consumers need to navigate through this times that we're in currently.
Absolutely.
So I'm not a big talker about myself, but I am thrilled to be here, and I look forward to the next 45 minutes to an hour with you guys.
Well, we're going to try to keep that to a 30 to 40 minute, guys, because I know your time is precious. And I was given from my agents already about 9 questions. And so, Diane, if you're ready, let's rock and roll this and let's get to our first question.
Absolutely. Okay. Karen, are you going to read the question or do you want me to read?
I'm just going to go ahead and read that out. So our first question is, what is the most common item an underwriter sends a file back for clarification?
I think that right now what we're seeing the most is employment, income calculations. We've had a lot of opportunity, and that's probably not the word. It's probably challenge is the word for home buyers in America have seen a lot of change since the pandemic in the way that they're paid, the hours they're paid, the structures themselves. So it's real important that we determine the type of pay structure that a buyer, their current employment is. It's also extremely important that we understand that if it's anything outside of a 40-hour at a certain rate of pay, that pay structure may require a duration to meet guidelines, something more than a current pay stub. And then it's also important that we get a 2 full year picture captured, even if that is also inclusive of gaps. And then we need the borrower to address any gaps that are greater than 60 days. Variable income would be one of the sticking points, I think, right now. There have been navigating the employment changes that have taken place. Buyers have had to take positions that are less than a 40-hour work week. That automatically puts us into a scenario where VA is looking for a minimum of 12 months to 24 months of established income so that we can average it to determine the qualifying amount to run the ratios and the residual income.
Okay, that's perfect. Perfect. Remember, guys, you can always send in a question if you have any questions in regards to anything. I'm happy to have her make any further clarifications, because if anyone knows, it's Diana. Let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2, what is the average underwriting turn time once a lender submits the loan?
Well, I think about any organization in the free world can brag right now, and most that's about the reduction in volume. But ours is running right at 24 hours. I put 48 in case there is a holiday. We saw, a little bit of a twitch during the holiday season. 24-hour turn time on new file and resubmissions is where our organization is. I think it is also real important, and sometimes I'm not sure that real estate agents are given this 100% across the board. I know Karen is super good at navigating scenarios that are not cookie cutters. But if a file requires a management exception, a condo approval, a reconsideration of value, any of those kind of escrow holdback, any of those kind of scenarios, it's going to add probably a 24-hour to 24-hour turn time on that additional approval. I'll give you a quick example, a management exception. If you have a borrower that's got a FICO score less than 580, but it's a very strong file, the borrower is prepared for home ownership, and the underwriter feels very strongly about the file, they will submit those loans to me. My turn time is normally about 4 hours, but I always like to give us the latitude of saying additional time will be required. But we should stay on track at 24 hours right now.
Wonderful. Well, actually, Diane, could you just hold on 1 second? We actually have a question that came in from one of my agents. Okay. How does a 1099 employee differ from a W-2 along these same lines?
Very great question. At the end of the day, a 1099 employee is going to require a 2-year history of that structure versus a W-2 employee who, if been working in the same field, can go to work on a new job, and within a full cycle of 30 days worth of earnings, we could use that income. On a 1099, there's a perception that the income can vary because it's let's go with a commissioned income individual. The ups and downs, the ebb and flow of the earnings needs to be considered over a period of time. I think a lot of people think that's unfair, but quite frankly, it's very fair because every organization that pays a 1099 employee has high quarters and low quarters, ups and downs. In order to give your borrower the fair assessment of an earnings, we need at least 12 to 24 months to be able to give them that all-in number for qualifying.
Wonderful. Oh, all right. Let's go on to question number 3. Thanks for that question, Mark. I appreciate that. Why are we told a file is sent in for clear to close, but it comes back with more conditions? I know this can be irritating with some of our agents. Absolutely. They're expecting a clear to close, and then wait, we need one more thing. So this is a great question.
It is a great question, and I want to make sure that I express my expectation. The only answer that's appropriate and acceptable to me is the one that's on the screen. If a document that was presented by the branch at the time of submitting for a loan to be cleared to close, if it creates additional questions, then the underwriter will condition for clarification. The example, it's a super cookie cutter example I've got on the screen. But if an updated bank statement was provided to the underwriter, it shows a $35,000 deposit in the last 30 days, and we have no paper trail. The underwriter is responsible for asking for an updated paper trail to ensure it's not debt that we're not including in qualifying, whatever the case may be. Outside of a submission of a document that creates more questions, underwriting should not be reconditioning a file. That's my answer, for sure.
I think we could definitely have a whole webinar based off of bank statements and large deposits.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I think and I'd love to hear any future webinars that you guys would like to have, because I think it's important to remind everybody that from a VA lending perspective, it's the last 100% financing animal out there on the planet. It isn't VA's intention to run the veteran through a bunch of rubbish when they're doing 100% financing. They get a seller credit for closing, blah, 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 blah. Limited assets, in theory, should be needed on a VA loan.
Perfect. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to just run right into question number 4. Not try to rush these, but I do want to be protective of everyone's time. Again, send those questions in if you have them. But Diana, here's question 4. As a new realtor, can you explain the process you go through when you get a new loan?
This was such a huge question, I thought. And it made me stop and think. I think people like to try to trick me sometimes and make me stop and think. But the one thing, the message I really want to make sure that I convey is that the partnership that you have with your branch is pivotal. Because in my opinion, underwriting is still simply a validation process of what your branch, your originator, your processor obtains and extracts the information from the buyer one-on-one. We're simply validating the information they collect. It's not rocket science. So that relationship between also the branch and the underwriter is very important to ensure it goes smoothly. If I were going to give you, and Karen's probably giggling, but that's old school. There's the 4 C's right there. I mean, as long as I've been doing this, that's what it's all about. What we look at, what the originator, what underwriting is going to be looking at to determine the borrower qualifies is their credit, their historical credit on paying their bills, the capacity to repay, their stability of their employment, their rate of pay. Can they qualify for the house they want? Capital, that's their asset base. Do they have the assets necessary to qualify for the loan that they've asked for? And collateral, it is what it is. Is the property compliant with VA standards? And can we get a clear to close on the collateral that we're using for the loan? Those 4 C's have stood the test of time for me. And if it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that.
And I always just reiterate to any of my new realtors, we're always here to walk you through the process right here at the branch. So as you bring your new loan file to us, we're happy to let you set in with us, and we'll show you how we're preparing that file to get it to our underwriter. And the key elements, I mean, we have a good connectivity with our underwriters, and we have an open communication with them, and we'll have an open communication with you as well. It's key. All right, let's go ahead. No new questions. So we're going to go right into 5. We're just cruising through, Diana. Okay.
I know.
Currently, what are the top challenges you see with home buyers?
I tried not to. I mean, Karen knows me, so I can go on and on and on. However, she did give me my time limit up front. So I tried to take what I think is the top three. You conquered these, and there's probably not a loan that we can't make happen. But the first, referring back to something I mentioned a few moments ago, employment history. Over the last several years, the workforce in general in our country, it's been a real period of change. That and the pandemic has been in the forefront of the why. Consumers have lost their jobs altogether, reduced hours, pay structure changes, and those situations. In some of them, they've had to start completely different careers, and that's analyzed different by an underwriter. So those my top one is employment, making sure that we analyze what their historical was, what their current is, how they relate together. I'm a super huge fan of making sure that we have that DD 214 in the file. I forgot to mention something relative to me is that I'm an Army mom, and I very clearly understand that the correlation between the military service and civilian, I am all in every time to make those work together in the veterans' benefit. So I think making sure that we get that document, it reads like a book to me. I can correlate almost anything to a current position from a military platform. So I think it's important just to know that the country has experienced change in employment. How do we get a little deeper in the weeds with our borrowers to make sure that we can support their current employment is stable for them to get into this new home? Credit, obviously, if you've had employment challenges, we've seen a bit of an increase in the ability to make their payments on time. Depending on the severity, it may require a healing period to be able, to be considered for loan approval. But again, I feel very strongly that if you have a customer who's had a great credit history, is an isolated period of credit issues, and he's back on track, we're going to work with those borrowers, but we have to understand the why. So documenting the file with your branch is the key. And then the last one, I'm speaking to the choir here. I have absolutely no doubt. But from my perspective, from a mortgage lending perspective, the available housing inventory, alongside interest rates increasing, has affected borrowers' qualifying buying power. And with that same sentence, I would say that we are now seeing alternate products become viable solutions, whether it's a buy down, it's an ARM, negotiating those contracts up front with seller participation has made a huge difference in the last 60 days versus 4 or 5 months ago. So I would say these are my top three on challenges that we would need to work together on.
Perfect. All right, guys. Again, any questions, feel free to show those, send those on in. Diane, I'm going to go to question number 6. Why do I care when the lender tells me it's a manual underwrite?
This was kind of also a funny question for me because I had a serious flashback to the 90s when Freddie walked in the door in the company that I worked for and said, "Hey, by the way, we're going to do this artificial underwriting thing." And I remember every underwriter in the room said, "Oh, okay, so you're not going to need us anymore. You're a dinosaur." So good news is we're not dinosaurs, but I also want to say that if you're VA, if you're sitting in Washington and you're VA would just as soon we manually underwrite every single loan because they truly believe the veteran is getting the very best type of review. So I don't steer away from manuals, but the truth is 2 things. One, it was created to allow for more flexibility in the guideline requirements. And you're going to see that with the big black book at VA says that qualifying DTI cannot exceed 41%. Well, I'm sure I approved a 60 plus last week. It was AUS supported. Credit scores. With someone who has managed their credit profile over the years and have a strong score, they're going to get more flexibility in artificial underwriting because they have the historical evidence that they are savvy within their financial goals and should know whether they can qualify for the house that they've requested based on income, assets, other debts, all the above. So the AUS takes that into consideration. If you don't have AUS, it takes flexibility away from referring back to the standard guideline requirements. The other piece I think is originally was the most relevant, giving your borrower the latitude, giving them the reduction in reduced documentation requirements based on how they have performed historically. They've been on the job for 10 years. They've got a strong credit profile. They've got a couple of months reserves in the bank. All of those things would create an AUS recommendation that allows less documentation for the file. If we don't have AUS and we have a manual underwrite loan, it's going to an underwriter to make the entire decision on the loan. It's not relying on any artificial underwriting. Then we revert back to, we need a verification of rent. It's the strongest indicator of how they're going to make their mortgage payment. Letter of explanations, if they've had credit bumps, if they've had job changes, those are all integral for that underwriter to understand the entire story of that borrower. Multiple bank statements, income docs, full doc, W-2s for 2 years, 30 days pay stubs, all of those things. Payment shock letter. If your housing payment is going way up, how are you going to handle it? If you need a budget letter in there as well. Those are all things that shouldn't be a standard requirement if we have an AUS approved loan. But if we go to a manual underwrite, it affects our flexibility in the guidelines and our documentation relief. I hope that makes sense. This is a big question, but I think these are the two pieces. If you can clearly understand, those are what lenders deal with when we don't have an AUS supported loan. You'll win. You'll win.
You know what I love? I love VA gives us a lot of flexibility. And I always tell my agents and I tell my clients that really everything's done through that artificial underwriting system, that AUS. But if it's a refer, it doesn't mean it's a denial. It just means we have to take that automation out of it. And now a real human has to make that decision, which causes, okay, since a human has to make that decision, we need to have extra documentation on top of that to ensure that we can make the proper decision for them. So we do a lot of manual underwrites. You know, I do a lot of manual underwrites because I want to help veterans get into homes, and I just have not found them to be a struggle whatsoever.
I agree. And as I started, again, the Department of Veterans Affairs would prefer that every lender does every loan as a manual underwrite because they feel very strongly that the veteran gets the best service by a full disclosure of their story and a decision made on that, not a simple data entry process.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Here we go. Onward to question 7. Can you override an opinion of the appraiser? Can you increase the value or change requirements as you see fit as the underwriter?
This is a lovely question. And unfortunately, it's a no to all those things. There was a time, probably 5+ years ago, where VA gave a SAR the ability to increase or decrease value by 5%. As you can imagine, the industry took advantage of that to some degree, and they took that away from us. And so we do not have that latitude. The other thing that's super important is that appraisers are governed by FIREA, which is a law, and a lender cannot reach out to them and say, I think you're wrong, you need to do this. I think you're wrong, we've got more comps, this and that and the other. Once we've got a full appraisal submitted through the portal at VA, we then have to go into an ROV, a reconsideration of value process, which we are extremely successful in getting those accomplished. Because I think there is challenges with, and that's why we're going to see this huge overtaking of the appraisal requirements on VA loans this year. More flexibility in the appraisal component, more mandates on appraisers who are going to be a part of the process, that they're educated in such a way where we can see higher quality reports. The minimum property requirements also are changing for VA. So there's a lot of good stuff coming down the pike on the VA appraisal itself. But when we get an appraisal in, the value, the requirements, those we have to adhere to. We issue the notice of value based on the report. If you want a reconsideration of value, you would get with your local branch. They would gather the data from you. We would submit it directly to VA for reconsideration and an increase in value. So our hands are tied, just as yours are. We simply evaluate the report that's given to us. And unless we find egregious oversights, let's say there's 5 bedrooms, they only put 4. Square footage is off. Those kind of egregious mistakes, those are ones that we will push back and we will get corrections on, and we will get many times increase in values. But that's really not the platform that we're reaching out to the appraisers. We're asking the appraiser, correct the report that you submitted to us because it's wrong, not increase your value. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
I think the one thing, while we're on appraisals, I just want to reiterate that I think comes up a lot is the myth that the appraisal is stuck to that property. And that's actually false. It actually belongs to the veteran that has so if it didn't appraise out, another veteran comes in, a new appraisal is ordered at that time. I know a myth is out there that appraisal stuck to that property for 6 months, and that's just not the case.
Correct.
Onward to question 8. I can't believe you're going this fast, Diana, just so you know.
It is. It's like I feel like I should get a star because I'm
highly impressed here.
I'm a talker, but I want to make sure that if there's any questions that are off of this, that folks have time to ask them.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Question 8. Seller concessions on a VA can exceed 4%. Is this just for VA, and how is that possible?
I think I'll start with the end of the question, but at the end of the day, a VA product, a FHA product, a conventional product are all governed by different requirements. And that's the how. The program was designed in all ways, but particularly this one, to protect the veteran for paying more for a home than necessary. The VA guidelines do allow the seller concessions, and I think it's important out of the gate, the last bullet point there, which is the important one to remember when you guys are upfront negotiating deals, is that normal discount points, and I'll define that as well. In our market right now, what we're considering normal is 2%. So if you go over 2%, that's extra. Okay. So normal discount points and the buyer's closing cost are not included in the 4%. So it's extremely important to understand that we've got all of that money available for participation, for payment on behalf of the buyer without restriction. Okay. But the 4%, if it's back to that, is there an unacceptable inducement for a veteran to buy the property, and what's determined to be excessive is something above 4%. I know this is a hot topic, but I think that's as simple as making sure you separate the two categories: seller concession and just typical seller paid. They're two different things on a VA loan.
Absolutely. And I know that can be challenging to explain for sure. But to know that closing cost and your normal discount points are not including that 4% is huge. And I think that will really help realtors really expand on negotiating for their buyer and sellers for the best benefit for the veteran.
I would agree. And I tried very hard to put together this PowerPoint that would be a reference piece. And I'm assuming that the agents will either have it or will get an electronic sent to them, because I really think it's important to have these kind of reference pieces. This is a topic that's unchanged. It's been the VA guide forever, but it's one of the hottest topics ever, every year, always, regardless of market, because it's convoluted in a way. But it's important that VA's motivation is that payment of typical closing cost and discount points on behalf of a veteran is always acceptable. When we're looking at a concession that appears to be excessive, that's when we don't want to put our veteran in harm's way, and they restrict it to the 4%.
Perfect. We are almost ready to go to question 9, but Diana, we actually have a question from Jason. How long does the ROV process take?
Now, again, I feel like we're super successful. Maybe that's partially because I'm not an extremely patient person. And if I know that we've had 3 business days go by and no activity, I'm going to call VA. But I would say VA's posted would say 7 to 10 business days. The reality is we don't see them go over 72 hours. We just really don't. Again, the market is dictating. I would reserve my answer to when everything is back and we're all jamming and volume is where we all want it to be. If your volume goes up, then your turn time could. That's why I want to be careful to say they're posted as 7 to 10, but right now they're 3 to 4 business days is all we're seeing.
Perfect. We're on our very last question, guys, and I really do like this question. Can I help pay closing cost from my commission to make a deal work?
I think you'd be surprised how many lenders would say no, because it just sounds all messed up, doesn't it? But it's not. Let's go back to the motivation VA has to help veterans. That's the story. So yes, the credit has to be used for closing cost or payment of the points. Again, as appropriate for the market, as appropriate currently is 2%. But if the credit is used for other items, then it falls back into that 4% max limitation. And what you're seeing here, I wanted to give this to you because I think it's a good differential. This is straight out of the VA handbook. Seller concessions include but are not limited to the following: payment of the funding fee, payment of the buyer's taxes and insurance, or what we like to refer to prepaids, provision of escrow funds to provide for a temporary buy down, gift for a television or a microwave, payment of extra points, so discount points greater than 2%. And then if your customer has a credit balance or a judgment that needs to be paid in full, and does not have their own resources, as long as these pieces all stay at 4% or below, then your commission can be a part of that process. So I hope I know the slide before it and this one together, I think it empowers you to understand what your baseline has to be when you're negotiating those contracts. I'm hopeful.
I just have, I personally, I just have one question for you, Diana.
Yeah.
On this commission one, is that for VA only, or does that, can they help with FHA and USDA? Because I know those can be a little bit more trickier.
Each product is different and each product has restrictions. I would have to look up the USDA because I swear to God, I'm VA centric. But
me too.
Right. FHA, I believe, is 6%.
Yes.
So, each category, each product. But at the end of the day, call Karen, say, hey, I've got it. They're bound and determined to do a USDA. What's my maximum contribution from seller pays and seller concessions? And
Perfect.
She can shoot those over to you. But know this to be true. Every product is different. So you can't, I would say it would be, and not in the consumer's best interest. But if you use this as a platform, this is the most restrictive. VA is going, again, back to that restrict cost associated with acquiring a loan for the interests of the veteran.
Perfect. Diana, thank you so much. Guys, if you have any questions, please feel free. You're always welcome to put them in the comments. You know how to reach out to me, and I'm happy to call Diana. I keep her on speed dial, I swear. And she puts up with me. You are awesome, Diana, and I can't thank you enough for just coming and talking to my friends today. You're just a huge asset for us.
And I thank you guys for giving me your time. I know that the real estate market is crazy, and we appreciate the partnership more than you know. Have a great day.
Thanks, Diana.
All right. Bye.
Guys, thank you again for joining us on our first webinar. And we plan to do this every month. So third Thursday of every month, we're going to come in at 11:30. Next month is going to be marketing with merit. And we're going to look at the different generations and how to market to each generation a little bit differently. So we hope you'll join us next month at the same time. Talk to you later, guys.